What if Santa Claus went missing and the Grim Reaper had to fill in? And what if in doing so we discovered that belief in mythical figures isn't just whimsical, it's essential for the universe to function? If you want a hilariously dark and weirdly heartwarming take on Christmas and belief and cosmic bureaucracy, or if you've ever wanted a holiday story featuring a sword-wielding governess, a hangover god, and a skeletal Santa impersonator who doesn't understand gift-giving but really tries, if so, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and I'm reading my way through the entire Discworld series, yes, all 41 books, and sharing my thoughts with you as I go. If you want to follow along with this ambitious, slightly absurd reading project, please check out my Discworld playlist right here in the channel, wherever the card shows up. And whether you're new to the disc or a longtime resident, there's something in there for everyone. Today's book, Hogfather, is the 20th book overall in the series and the 4th book in the Death sub-series. As usual, I give what I feel to be a pretty detailed summary of the synopsis of the book, and there are spoilers, so there's my spoiler alert right now. The reason why is, with such a large series, and I love the Discworld books, but just like any series of this size, you can certainly get things mixed up, even though there is a fair amount of variation. Within each sub-series, there's a chance that you could get confused about this or that. So I do think that it is beneficial to the peoples of the world. For those interested in all things Discworld, I do think it is useful to have a solid summary. So here is my detailed summary of what happens in Hogfather. The Auditors of Reality, the celestial bureaucrats committed to order, seek to eliminate the Hogfather, who is clearly a Santa Claus-like figure who delivers gifts to children on December 32nd. It is the Discworld, so if you think that there is some better understanding about that date, then you'll be surprised. There's always things like this that Terry Pratchett just drops in. So December 32nd. And of course, the auditors are bound by the rules that prevent direct interference in the world, and the auditors hire the Assassin's Guild to carry out the task. And the job falls to the eccentric and dangerous Mr. Teatime, known for his imaginative cruelty. Mr. Teatime recruits a gang of criminals and tracks down a courier for the Tooth Fairy, and using the courier's access, he breaks into the Tooth Fairy's domain and steals the vast collection of children's teeth. With these teeth, he gains the power to manipulate children's minds and erase their belief in the Hogfather. Because belief in the Hogfather is crucial to the turning of the world, including the rising of the sun, Death decides to take on the Hogfather's duties himself to preserve faith in the holiday. So disguised as the Hogfather and accompanied by his servant Albert, Death tries to keep Hogswatch traditions alive. However, his literal approach leads to some questionable acts, such as reviving a dead match girl and stealing an upscale restaurant's food to feed the poor, replacing it with mud and old boots. Since Death cannot confront Mr. Teatime directly, Mr. Teatime is hiding in a realm shaped by children's belief where death does not exist. He turns to his granddaughter, Susan Stow-Hewitt, for help. Susan, intrigued despite herself, begins investigating at the Hogfather's Castle of Bones, where she meets Bilious, the god of hangovers, and tries to cure him at the Unseen University. There, the wizards discover a host of new whimsical beings like the Veruca Gnome, the Cheerful Fairy, and Eater of Socks, and all are spontaneously forming a result of belief left unchanneled by the Hogfather's absence. Following the clues, Susan and Bilious traveled to the Tooth Fairy's realm, where they uncovered Mr. Teatime's plot. And Mr. Teatime attacks Susan with Death's sword, but because they're in a belief-based reality where Death has no power, the weapon is actually useless. So Susan defeats Mr. Teatime and throws him over the tower, causing him to vanish. She then meets the Tooth Fairy, formerly the original Bogeyman, which actually is an ongoing story, who dies from the effort of protecting the realm. Susan entrusts Banjo Lillywhite, who is a simple-minded gangster, with guarding the teeth. She also rescues the Hogfather himself, now reverted to his primordial hog form, from the auditors who have taken the shape of savage dogs. On her return, Death explains the cosmic importance of what has happened. Just as she begins to process it, Susan is ambushed by Mr. Teatime one final time. This time she kills him with a fireplace poker, bringing the strange adventure to an end. That's my summary, and my personal reaction is that I loved reading Hogfather. It's one of Pratchett's most beloved books for a reason. It takes the bones of a traditional Christmas story and builds something much stranger, as well as something funnier and deeper on top of it. But like many great Discworld novels, it isn't just a parody. It is, of course, obviously making fun of Christmas, or excuse me, Hogswatch. But more than that, it's a meditation on belief and myth and the stories we tell ourselves to keep our traditions going. It also has some of the best uses of Death as a character that I've read so far in this series. I think Death dressing up as the Hogfather and trying to do the job with his usual grim literalism is very entertaining, but it's also touching in its own odd way. And Susan is this practical, fantastic protagonist that is always meant as a foil to Death and his approach to the people that he interacts with, and just his fatigue of being an underappreciated civil servant, essentially. And so Susan, who is practical and brave, as well as a little exasperated, and ultimately she is going to be the one who steps in to save belief itself. And Susan Stowe actually frequently plays a role in the Death sub-series. And of course, you may want to go back to the previous books in the Death sub-series to fully understand who Susan is. She is the granddaughter of Death. I know that sounds weird, but if you go back and you read those, you'll have a better understanding of why exactly that is. I must say that there's just something so smart about the way Pratchett treats belief, not as something naive, but as something powerful, as well as something necessary and even sacred in its own weird way. And I think Hogfather is a wonderful reminder of the complexities of belief and the challenges of belief that I think that Terry Pratchett does a wonderful job at engaging with. I know that many people that read his books, especially ones like Small Gods, can come away with both an impression that he is a God-denying atheist that is trying to be as critical as can be about faith and belief, but then there's also a lot of firm believers in whatever their faith is that come away from books like this, as well as Small Gods, that actually have a much more contemplative and have a much greater appreciation for the way Terry Pratchett, he's known for a good turn of phrase, but there's also frequently a lot more profundity in those turn of phrases that I think go a long way in explaining what makes Discworld so popular. And I think Hogfather is actually a really good example of that. Obviously, it would have been better if I had done this book around Christmas time. Maybe I will have to reissue it around Christmas time, but I am just now getting to it in the reading order. And so here it is coming out in June. And hey, why not read it in June as well? I will include some of my favorite quotes from this book. I love the quotes, and this is just one of those series that when I do a book on it, I have to include some of my favorite ones. So let's do a few of the funny ones first that I really enjoyed. For example, the phrase, "someone ought to do something," was not by itself a helpful one. People who used it never added the writer, and that someone is me. And then Death says at one point, "Human beings make life so interesting. Do you know that in a universe so full of wonders, they have managed to invent boredom?" That's true. At one point, someone says, "Hello, inner child. I'm the inner babysitter." So here's one that I laughed at, but I also think that it's got more truth to it if you think about it for a second. And that is, "Some things are fairly obvious when it's a 7-foot skeleton with a scythe telling you them." I think that's true. I mean, not necessarily just the embodiment of death, but just anything large, anything with authority or power. If it says something, it suddenly can become much more obvious. And so I loved that quote when I read it. Here are some that I think are a little more thoughtful, although also have humorous elements to them, especially this first one. "Real stupidity beats artificial intelligence every time." Of course, this was written long before ChatGPT, but I don't know, that one stuck with me. Another one, "There is always time for another last minute." I love that one, especially since one of the big things about Death is the fact that he is detached from time. And so this idea of there's always room, there's always time for one last minute, I actually think there's something really important behind that. And then possibly the best quote from this book, and one of the best quotes in all of Discworld that I really loved. And this comes from Death when he says, it's actually part of a larger conversation between Death and Susan. I recommend seeking out that whole dialogue. It's wonderful, but let me just give you what I think to be the most impressive part of it. And this is when Death says, "Humans need fantasy to be human, to be the place where the falling angel meets the rising ape." And so you can see how that is, of course, tapping into so much about religion as well as science. And I love that quote. It's so good. And again, just an example of what makes Terry Pratchett so good at what he did. Who is this book for? Well, I say pretty much the same thing on all of these book reviews for Discworld books, but I will go ahead and say it again here. And I think that, you know, this is a great book for Discworld fans. I think that of almost all of them, but I think this is a particularly good one. Obviously, it's a standout in the series, and it is a strong entry, I think, specifically in the Death sub-series. So if you've been enjoying the books in the Death sub-series, so that would be Mort, Reaperman, and Soul Music up to this point, I think that you will like this all the more so. I think you have a lot of the same humor, much of the same things going on in this that you see in the other books. Of course, you have Death really trying to just understand the world in which he works, and he just has certain limitations to it, but he is also just trying to be helpful, which might not seem the case to most people that are so afraid of death, but you know, he is trying to do what he can. And of course, at the heart of all that is this question over belief and believing in things and in traditions. So I think all of those make this a great book if any of that sounds interesting to you and you're already a fan of Discworld. I would also say that if you have not read any Discworld, you could do worse than starting with this one. Sure, it is the fourth book in a sub-series, and usually you want to go read the previous books, at least in the sub-series, so you have at least a little more depth and nuance, but it's going to become pretty obvious to you. Most of the things that people love about this series are going to be pretty clear to you, even if you pick up just this one. And I've said that on pretty much all of these books. There are a few where the only reason why I don't recommend reading them as standalones is maybe they're just not as strong, or because there are a few where you do have a very direct tie-in to another book, and so you may want to go read that book before taking on a specific one. But Hogfather is not one of them. This is one that you absolutely can pick up and enjoy, and I recommend, if you want, go ahead, turn it into one of your Christmas classic reads. I think that it can be a perfect holiday read. So if you like your Christmas stories, especially ones with a twist, and of course, a twist, I mean assassin guilds and you know, teeth-based mind control and discussions about whether you need to believe in the Tooth Fairy to get justice and mercy, then I think this is a great book for you to pick up. It is clearly going to be a bit dark, but it's also going to be funny, and it's also going to be heartfelt and brimming with imagination. That is certainly something that you will find in all of the Discworld books. And of course, if you're someone who loves satire, I would specifically say satire with substance, or if you're interested in how fantasy can be used to explore big philosophical ideas, again, with some real humor there, then Hogfather is going to be right up your alley, and I have to recommend it. Who is this not for? Well, again, I say this in almost one of these videos that it might not be the place to, I say this in almost all my videos. It might not be the best place to start your Discworld journey if you think you're going to read a lot of the books. But if you have no idea, then yes, I think it's actually a perfectly fine one to start with. But if you think you want to read more than one, or you want to tap into a sub-series, Death is a great sub-series to read, but then I would recommend going to the beginning of that sub-series. I myself am just starting at the beginning. A lot of people don't recommend that. I actually disagree, because I know I want to read all 41 books, and I actually like that as I read them in publication order, that means I do get to jump around in the sub-series, and that's something that I personally appreciate, and that's my approach. But you can go into the Discworld fandom and get differences of opinion, and that's fine. But that's where I stand on this. Of course, you can check out my introduction to the Discworld series video to get more about that. Technically, Pratchett designed most of his books to be readable on their own, and I think that Hogfather does that function. But like I said, it is also the 20th book in the series, and so that means there are going to be callbacks as well as recurring characters and some larger themes that hit harder if you've read at least a few of the earlier novels, especially the ones in the Death sub-series, as I've already said. If you jump into Hogfather without knowing, for example, who Susan is, or without having seen Death develop over several books, you may not fully appreciate the emotional beats. It's also worth noting that Pratchett doesn't hold your hand. He drops you into the middle of the world and expects you to keep up. Matter of fact, I feel like that's a key part of the humor, is that there is actually a fair amount of consistency. I think sometimes there's this impression that he just kind of, because it is a satire as well as a parody, it's actually both, that he just makes up the world as he goes along. But I actually feel like there's far more consistency than you would expect, and he still manages to create both this incredibly imaginative yet satirical and just downright and satirical yet contemplative world that I've enjoyed so far. If you are new to Discworld, this one might be just a bit overwhelming or a little confusing, especially since it plays with some abstract concepts like belief and metaphysics and narrative structure. And if you have no familiarity with Discworld, then those could all present a problem. Also, if you are looking for a traditional, straightforward plot or a traditional fantasy adventure, this may not be your cup of tea, but that is going to apply to pretty much all of the Discworld books. Pratchett delights in his digressions and the odd characters and his sharp commentary, and so for some readers, that's a joy, and for some it can be a little disorienting, and so it's up to you to decide where exactly in the fantasy genre you want to engage. And if this sounds appealing to you, then by all means, please pick up a Discworld book, whether it's this one or another one. I have to say that for me, Hogfather is one of the highlights in the whole series. It's funny, just like all of them. It's strange, just like pretty much all of them. And it is surprisingly moving, just like almost all of them. And so I'd say that this one is a fine example of what makes Discworld so great. And like I said, because this one has that seasonal aspect to it, and because it just has so much to think about and chew on, I think that it's just a really good entry in the entirety of the Discworld series. However, I still have quite a few books to go before I can make that statement definitively. Again, Pratchett's ability to use fantasy to explore real human questions about belief, morality, and why we bother telling stories, it's all there. And it never ceases to amaze me and intrigue me. So whether it is during the holidays or during the summer, I think this is certainly a book that you can enjoy, especially if you're already a fan of Discworld. Especially if you're a fan of Discworld. But remember, the sun doesn't come up because we believe in the Hogfather. We believe in the Hogfather so the sun can come up. If you have read Hogfather, please let me know your thoughts. Let me know what you're thinking about Hogfather, about the Death sub-series, or about anything in the Discworld. I would love to get this conversation going. Please let me know what you're thinking in the comments. If you are enjoying this video or any of my videos, please share them so more people know. And don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications. And until next time, keep those pages turning.